Hello, and welcome back to the Striha Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Parker Striha, and on today's episode, we are going to be discussing the craziness of this year's NBA trade deadline. I am by no means professional, but I do love talking about sports, so thank you for joining me. As an NBA fan and a sports fan in general, days like today are some of my favorite. I love watching players get traded from team to team because it's just really exciting. It almost makes real life seem more like a video game, and I'm okay with that. On today's episode, I'm just going to be going over every trade that happened and giving my thoughts on them one at a time. Then at the end of the episode, I'm going to be going over a couple things I'm surprised we didn't end up seeing during this year's trade deadline. So today's NBA trade deadline was absolutely wild. I did not think that we were going to see as many trades as we actually did, but I'm not mad at all. Every time my phone buzzed, I got excited because I didn't know if it would be my girlfriend or if it was a Twitter notification announcing another trade. Either one would have made me very happy. So our first trade that we are going to be going over was arguably the biggest trade that happened at all. It was the Brooklyn Nets and Philadelphia 76ers in the James Harden trade. The Brooklyn Nets received Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, an unprotected 2022 first-round pick, and a protected 2027 first-round pick. And the Philadelphia 76ers received James Harden and Paul Millsap. Overall, I really liked this trade for both teams. The Brooklyn Nets were looking to get rid of Paul Millsap anyways, just because it wasn't working out, and they were able to do that in this trade, and they were also able to get rid of James Harden, who had expressed his desire to leave the team. And then in return, they end up getting Ben Simmons, who is still really young, and he is arguably one of the best defensive players in the entire league. They have Seth Curry, who is an amazing shooter. And then they have Andre Drummond coming in, who is a good backup or starting center, depending on, I don't really know what they have for center on their roster. So he could honestly be their starting center, and I wouldn't be surprised. Those picks I don't think are going to mean that much because the 76ers shouldn't be picking in the lottery anytime soon. So those picks, if they do end up in Brooklyn, will most likely be late picks. But overall, I did really like this trade. I think it improves both teams. Both teams win because for the Sixers, Ben Simmons hadn't played all year. He wanted to leave Philadelphia, and he was going to sit until he got moved. And then he arguably gets put in not necessarily a better situation, but a better situation for him, I think, because when you're comparing teammates, Kevin Durant is a better overall player, I think, than Joel Embiid. Kevin Durant's arguably the best player in the entire league. So for Ben Simmons to be able to go in and play with a guy like Kevin Durant, I think that only raises his ceiling. Obviously, I don't think playing with Kevin Durant is going to have Obviously, playing with Kevin Durant, I don't think that's going to mean Ben Simmons is going to start shooting 50% from three or anything crazy, but he's able to learn from someone who is arguably one of the best scorers and shooters in the entire league, so I think that's really beneficial for him. There was a lot of speculation that this trade was actually going to go down, but it just wasn't sure what pieces were going to be involved. I mean, I kind of figured it was going to be the Sixers and Nets completing a trade, and the only thing I was actually correct on that the Brooklyn Nets got back was Ben Simmons, and I believe the two first-round picks I had right, just not the years. I didn't think they were going to give up Seth Curry and Andre Drummond, but I think it made sense just for money-wise. And as part of the trade, I believe James Harden is opting into his player option next year, which will keep him in Philly for this season and next season. So the Sixers will be paying him, I think, almost $48 million, which is astronomical. But for a player of Harden's stature, if he can get back to the way he was in his last full season in Houston, the Sixers, I think, do win this trade, but only time will tell. Moving on, we have probably the most useless trade. Not useless trade, but not the biggest. It wasn't really anything special. It was the Miami Heat receiving a 2026 second-round pick and the Oklahoma City Thunder receiving KZ Okpala. I am a Thunder fan, so I really don't have any feedback on this trade. I'm just surprised we actually traded a pick out of the 38 I think we have over the next however many years. I've never heard of KZ. I don't think he's going to end up staying in OKC very long. They're probably going to either buy him out or just straight up release him. So that's really all I got for this trade. The next trade was the San Antonio Spurs receiving Goran Dragic and a protected 2022 first-round pick. And then the Toronto Raptors received Thaddeus Young, Drew Eubanks, and a 2022 second-round pick via Detroit. Dragic had already been sitting out of games. It was speculation that he was going to get moved. It was just kind of a matter of where he was going to go. I personally like that he was going to the Spurs, but they're actually going to buy out his contract, which means he will become an unrestricted free agent. Some teams that have been rumored to be interested in him are the Dallas Mavericks, Milwaukee Bucks, Chicago Bulls, and the LA Clippers. So none of those are bad teams to be going on. They're definitely better situations than Toronto and San Antonio, but it'll be interesting to see where he goes. I want to see him get a ring. I personally think he will. I don't even know where I think he'll go. I think he can go to Milwaukee or probably Dallas are my two top picks, just because I don't think Dallas has really a lot at point guard, especially if Jalen Brunson does leave this offseason. And then Toronto is going to waive Drew Eubanks. So in reality, this pick was a first-round pick for Thaddeus Young and a second-round pick. I guess really is what it is. I don't know how much of an impact Thaddeus Young is going to have in Toronto. Only time will tell. I think they have a lot of forwards on that team, so I don't really know where in the rotation he'll be. If he even ends up joining the rotation, I can see Toronto completely releasing him or buying him out or doing something like that. I don't think Thaddeus Young will really do a lot for Toronto this year. The next trade was the Dallas Mavericks receiving Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans, and the Washington Wizards receiving Kristaps Porzingis and a future second-round pick. The year wasn't specified on that pick, so it could be this year, it could be 2027. I don't really think any of us know. But I was honestly surprised that the Mavericks moved on from Porzingis. I personally really like Porzingis, but apparently I don't know if it was frustration on his side or the organization's side, but clearly it didn't work out. I liked that he and Luka were paired together. I don't know if their play styles just clashed or I don't know what all went down there, but I'm happy he's getting a fresh start especially with a team where Bradley Beal is out this year. He could step in and he could probably be the number one scoring option if he gets healthy. And then for the Mavericks, they get Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. Bertans is on a massive contract, hasn't been playing very well this year, so it'll be interesting to see how much playing time he gets with the Mavericks or if they'll just bench him and try to trade him in the offseason. And then Spencer Dinwiddie, there was a lot of speculation that he was going to be leaving Washington one way or another. Apparently teammates didn't like him. He was clashing with Bradley Beal of some sort. So it didn't really look, it was inevitable that he was going to get moved. It was just a matter of to where. I really like him going to Dallas. I think he's a good player. He has potential to grow. He's obviously not like 22, so his potential could be a little limited. But I think he's a good player. He could go in. He can be a good number 2 option behind Luka or even a number 3. I don't know who the number 2 would be if he's not, but I guess we'll have to see. I don't really pay a lot of attention to Dallas, so I don't really know what that roster's looking like other than Luka. Our next trade was a big one. It was a 4-team trade between the Sacramento Kings, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Los Angeles Clippers, and the Detroit Pistons. The Kings received Dante DiVincenzo, Trey Lyles, and Josh Jackson. The Bucks received Serge Ibaka and 2 future second-round picks and cash considerations. The Clippers received Rodney Hood and Semi Ojeleye, and the Detroit Pistons received Marvin Bagley. I'm pretty torn on this trade. I like Dante DiVincenzo. There was talks he was going to be traded to Sacramento a couple years ago anyways, so it'll be interesting to see what he does on that team. I think the Kings are bad, so I don't really know what the future is for him there, because I can see him leaving this year just to get out of Sacramento. Serge Ibaka for the Bucks. I think that's a really good move for them if he can get healthy and stay healthy, because with Brook Lopez being out pretty much the whole season, having a veteran guy like Serge Ibaka come in could be crucial for a playoff run and a potential repeat championship. The Clippers don't really have a lot to say. I think Rodney Hood's a solid player. I don't think he's great, but he can come in. That Clippers team is kind of ragtag. Anyone can score 20 points a night, it seems. So I think Rodney Hood will fit right in. And then Marvin Bagley is going to the Pistons. I think it's a great move for the Pistons. If any team was able or was going to trade for a guy like Marvin Bagley and see what they have in him, it was going to be the Pistons probably. Marvin Bagley really hasn't shown a lot since being taken number 2 overall a couple years ago. Things didn't work out with him in Sacramento, so I think it's just good for him to get a fresh start. And maybe this offseason he can sign an extension and the Pistons can try to build around him and Cade Cunningham. I don't really know how that's going to go, but I guess we'll have to see. I think he can be a good NBA player if he can just stay healthy, but that's really been the concern with him in his career is he just hasn't been healthy, and when he has been healthy, he hasn't really played that great. And then the Indiana Pacers traded Torrey Craig for Jalen Smith and a future second-round pick from the Phoenix Suns. Like the Thunder and Heat trade earlier, don't really have a lot to say about this one. Don't know enough about the players. I don't really know if either trade's going to really have any impact for either team. The Suns are good. The Pacers aren't. I think this is just a good move for the Suns. They're getting a player who I don't really know a lot about, Torrey Craig, but as far as I can remember, I think he's a decent player. I think he's good in 2K, so I don't really know a lot. But the Suns, I don't think, until they prove me wrong, I think every move they've made so far has been good. They were in the finals last year, so I'm not going to question anything that front office is doing. Then the Boston Celtics received Derek White in exchange for Josh Richardson, Romeo Langford, a 2022 first-round pick, which is pick 1 to 4 protected, and then a 2028 first-round pick swap with the Celtics going to the Spurs. I don't really got a lot to say about this one. I think Derek White's a good player, good guard. He can defend on the outside, which is really important in today's league. Celtics have really been leaning on their defense, and I think White can step in and be that number 1 point guard that the Celtics have been lacking this year. And for the Spurs, Langford's really young. I think the Spurs could have something with him, but I don't really know what. Richardson, he's been iffy. He's been really inconsistent the last couple years. He's been on multiple different teams. So it'll be interesting to see if he even stays in San Antonio past this season. The first-round pick, that they're going to get the first-round pick. I mean, the Celtics aren't going to be picking anywhere near 1 to 4 unless they completely botch the season and miss the playoffs, which I don't see happening. So, I mean, that's a guaranteed pick for the Spurs. And then the 2028 first-round pick swap, that I guess we got a couple years to see what that'll actually amount to. And the Celtics were busy again as they received a second-round pick in exchange for PJ Dozier and Bol Bol going to the Magic. This was just a way to get off the contracts. I don't think either of them were really on big contracts, but the Celtics are kind of screwed for money right now, so they just needed to get rid of players in any way they could. I like Bol Bol. I think he could be really good. And now the Magic have Bol Bol and Mo Bamba. So, I mean, two really exciting and fun young centers. I don't know if either of them will really amount to anything. But once Bol Bol gets healthy, he could possibly become something for the Magic. He's not going to be like prime Orlando Shaq in any way, at least in my opinion. But I'm really excited to see what he can amount to once he gets healthy. And I don't know if he'll be back. I think he might actually be out all season. But hopefully next year he can go out, he can ball out. He'll probably get some pretty good playing time on that Orlando Magic team because they're really bad and they're really young. So they really have nothing to play for right now. Then the New Orleans Pelicans received C.J. McCollum, Larry Nance Jr., and Tony Snell. And the Portland Trail Blazers received Josh Hart, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Tomas Satoransky, Marcos Luzada Silva, a protected 2022 first-round pick, and 2 future second-round picks. I hated this trade. Absolutely hated this trade. I don't really know what the Trailblazers are doing. CJ McCollum is a good NBA player. He's by no means elite, but I think the value they could have got for him was a lot better than this. I don't even know who Marcos Luzada Silva is. Don't really think he's an important piece of this trade. Tomas Satoransky, veteran guard. I don't think he's terrible. Don't think he's great. Josh Hart, young wing, could amount to something, but he hasn't really yet. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a really young guard, but Portland has an insane amount of guards on that team right now, so I don't know if he'll get any playing time or what the situation is with him. And then the Pelicans are getting CJ McCollum, which I love for them. Like the Clippers-Blazers trade that happened last weekend, the Trailblazers got absolutely finessed. The New Orleans Pelicans won this trade by all means. CJ McCollum is a really good NBA player. He can come in and be one of their starting guards, and he can help push that team to the playoffs if that's the goal this year. I don't know what exactly I don't know where that team is in the standings or if they have any shot at the playoffs or the play-in, but CJ McCollum could definitely help boost that team's chances. Larry Nance Jr., he's not a great NBA player, but I definitely like him. I think he's good. He's got some pretty good highlight dunks that I love watching every now and then. Tony Snell is, well, he's Tony Snell. That's about all I got for him. But Nickeil Alexander-Walker's time in Portland was extremely short-lived, as this morning the Utah Jazz were a part of a 3-team trade with the San Antonio Spurs and the Trailblazers that saw the Utah Jazz receiving Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Juancho Hernan-Gomez. The San Antonio Spurs received Tomas Satoransky and a second-round pick via the Utah Jazz. And then the Portland Trailblazers received Joe Ingles, Elijah Hughes, and a second-round pick via Utah. Nickeil Alexander-Walker's time in Portland was very short-lived, and that's good for him. He's going on a team that could compete this year. I don't know how far they'll get in the playoffs, but I think pairing him up with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert will be good for him. Juancho Hernan-Gomez, don't really know a lot about him, but he had solid depth to that Jazz team. Tomas Satoransky didn't last long in Portland either. He is now a Spur with that second-round pick. Don't really think either of those will amount to anything in San Antonio. And then once again, the Trailblazers. Don't know what they're doing. I love Joe Ingles. He's one of my favorite players in the league. The Splash Uncle is what I call him. Don't know why, but I heard it somewhere, and that's what I call him. I don't think he's going to re-sign with Portland in the offseason. He just tore his ACL recently too, so he's not going to be getting a big contract in free agency. He'll probably end up going back to Utah on a cheap deal. He can go. He's familiar with everything there. He can recover from his injury and just be a part of that rotation again. Don't know who Elijah Hughes is, and that second-round pick is going to be extremely late just because Utah is going to compete in the playoffs. Another trade that I'm kind of torn on this one. The Indiana Pacers received Tyrese Halliburton, Buddy Hield, and Tristan Thompson. And the Sacramento Kings received Domantas Sabonis, Jeremy Lamb, Justin Holiday, and a 2023 second-round pick. I love this trade for the Trailblazers because I wanted them and I thought they should get rid of everything, trade their good players, get as many assets as they could, and that's what they did. They traded Domantas Sabonis and brought back Tyrese Halliburton, who is one of, if not, he's not the best. He's one of the best young players in the league. So I think he's definitely a piece that Sacramento can build, that Indiana can build around with Miles Turner. And then they bring in Buddy Hield and Tristan Thompson. 2 veteran players, probably won't be on the team next season because I'm sure Indiana will trade them for assets. Like I said earlier, Indiana's not that great of a team. Don't really have a lot of expectations for them. But then the Kings, who have also been an awful team, bring in Domantas Sabonis, and I love that. I love that he can go in, he can be their starting 4 or starting 5, and he could be a building block for the Kings alongside of De'Aaron Fox, who is another one of my favorite players in the league. I think he only has 1 or 2 years left on his contract, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the future. And then Jeremy Lamb and Justin Holiday, just some bench depth. Don't really think either of those will amount to a lot in Sacramento, but you never know. Someone could get hurt, and Jeremy Lamb could go into the starting lineup and score 30, 50. You never really know. He's kind of a wishy-washy player, it seems. But the Boston Celtics were busy this trade deadline as they had another trade. They received Daniel Tice, who was coming back to Boston, and the Houston Rockets received Dennis Schroeder, Enes Freedom, and Bruno Fernando. After the trade, it was announced that Houston is going to be waiving Enes Freedom. I don't blame him. I don't think he's by any means a bad player, but he doesn't really fit what Houston's trying to do right now. They're trying to rebuild, so an old, slow center doesn't really do a lot for them. Schroeder, he's not going to be in Houston very long. They'll probably buy him out because they're trying to develop Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green. So Schroeder really has no place on this roster because he's not going to want to be a bench player on a really bad team. Bruno Fernando could amount to something. He's really young. I really like to see what Houston could turn him into. I think he could be a good player. But they also have Alperen Sengun, I think is how you pronounce his name, who was the first round pick of the Rockets this year. So I think he'll take priority over Fernando as the primary center for the Rockets, but only time will tell. And then the Celtics, they are getting Daniel Tice back. He had a contract that the Rockets weren't willing to pay, and he's now going back to Boston, which is obviously a much better situation for him. So I really like that move for the Celtics. They're getting a veteran center back. That way, Al Horford doesn't have to play as many minutes, and Daniel Tice can just come in, be a game wrecker. He's by no means going to score 20, 25 a night, but he can come in and give 10 points, 15 rebounds, or something like that. So I think that really helps the Celtics going into the All-Star break, and then hopefully they get a playoff push, and he's going to be a big part of that. The Washington Wizards received Vernon Carey and Ish Smith, and the Charlotte Hornets received Montrezl Harrell. This was another trade I really liked, primarily just for the Hornets. I don't think the Washington Wizards really got anything special in return. The Hornets needed another center. I needed a center that wasn't Cody Zeller, is how I'll put it. They had been in talks and in rumors around a lot of centers on the trade block, so I'm glad they went out and got one, and they really didn't have to give up a lot to get Harrell. He was a solid center for the Clippers a couple years ago, and then he was all right on the Lakers before getting traded in that Russell Westbrook trade. So I think he's going to step in. He'll most likely be the starting center for the Hornets. Gives them a really strong defensive presence at the center position. He is a little short for a center, though. I think he is only 6'9", so there are a lot of bigger guys in the league that they honestly can't even bully him, though, because they might be taller, but he is built. He's a pretty solid center. He can hold his own. So, I mean, I really liked that trade for the Hornets, not so much for the Wizards, but with Bradley Beal being hurt, the Wizards don't exactly have a lot to play for. And then the last trade was the Phoenix Suns receiving Aaron Holiday and the Washington Wizards receiving cash considerations. Not really sure what this trade was about. I don't know if they were just trying to get rid of his contract or I don't know. The Suns just get another player to add to their rotation. They're already one of the best teams. I think they do have the best record in the league this year, so they're just getting better. The more players you can have that can play not quality minutes, but that can come in and you can trust. I don't know how many minutes he's actually going to play, but I don't think he's a bad player. I don't think he's a good player, but he'll come in if he plays at all, and I think the Phoenix Suns are really going to like having him. Some rumors. There were some rumors that I did hear that I'm kind of sad nothing happened. I'm kind of sad these rumors didn't actually amount to anything because I think these three would have been really nice. There were talks apparently that the Thunder and the 76ers had about Tobias Harris. If I'm Tobias Harris, I hate that. I don't want to go to OKC because they're not playing for anything this year. They're really bad, and the 76ers are really good. I think that would have just been a way for the Sixers to get rid of his contract because he is getting paid a hefty amount, and he probably would have been traded from OKC in the offseason anyways. But as a Thunder fan, I would have really loved to see Tobias Harris in a Thunder jersey. He's not one of my favorite players in the league, but I do think he's a good player, and I love watching him play. There were talks also that the Celtics really wanted to acquire John Collins. Those obviously didn't amount to anything. I don't really know what the spacing would have been like for that team, but I like John Collins. I think he would have been good in Boston, but that obviously didn't work out. And with Boston, again, there was allegedly a deal in place for the Celtics to send starting guard Marcus Smart to Minnesota. I don't know what they would have gotten in return, but I think that would have been actually a good trade for Minnesota. They get a veteran guard with playoff experience that could come in and either start or be a really good 6th or 7th man for a team that's looking to actually make the playoffs for the first time in a couple years. And like Patrick Beverley, he's just a veteran guard that can really help those younger players that have never been to the postseason. There were some surprise moves that didn't happen this week. There were some moves that I'm surprised didn't happen this trade deadline, specifically with the Lakers. There was a lot of talk that they were going to try to get rid of Russell Westbrook or Talen Horton-Tucker just for whatever they could. That obviously didn't happen. The Lakers I heard them in a couple rumors, but nothing amounted to anything with those. The Rockets actually did offer the Lakers John Wall for Russell Westbrook and a first-round pick. I think that's a little bit too much value for John Wall. Hasn't really played in, I think, 2 years. He hasn't played all year this year, I don't believe. And obviously Russell Westbrook has been struggling this year, but he's still a good NBA player. And a first-round pick I just don't think that would have been a good trade for the Lakers. And then the Knicks didn't make any moves, I was also surprised. There was talks that Julius Randle wanted out of New York, and I don't know if it's mutual. I don't know if they want to get rid of him or if it's just him that wants to leave, but he's obviously still in New York, so it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. And then the Oklahoma City Thunder, I'm surprised they didn't make any more moves other than that one with the Heat. Like I said earlier, they have almost 40 first and second round picks over the next however many years. You're obviously not going to draft 40 players over the next, say, 7 or 8 years just because that makes no sense. This isn't the NFL. I figured they would have at least offered. I'm sure they did make offers for certain players, but obviously nothing happened. Like I said, as a Thunder fan, I would have loved to see them bring in a guy like in my 5 trades I want to see happen before the deadline video. I wanted them to bring in DeAndre Ayton. Obviously, that didn't happen. I don't know the likelihood of that happening. Something could go through in the offseason because he will be a restricted free agent, I think, and the Thunder could get him in a sign-and trade. It'll be interesting to see. I think this offseason is going to be really interesting because there's going to be a lot more trades, especially with the teams that made moves today. I'm your host, Parker Striha, and this has been the Striha Sports Podcast. Our random sport fact of the day is that San Antonio Spurs legend David Robinson was the first overall pick in the 1987 NBA Draft. As always, thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for whenever a new video gets posted.